What happens when a harmless party game spirals into a public betrayal, leaving divorce papers on my doorstep? Contesting my husband's loyalty turn into a legal nightmare I never saw coming. Let me tell you how a single dare ended with me locked out of my own life. The wine had been flowing freely at our annual 4th of July barbecue, and I was feeling bold. Maybe it was the way Malcolm had barely looked up from his phone all evening, or how he'd spent 20 minutes discussing lesson plans with my neighbor instead of paying attention to me. After 12 years of marriage, I felt invisible in my own home. "Truth or dare," Janet Colby announced, clapping her hands together as our friends gathered in a circle on the living room floor. At 40, she still had the energy of a college student, and tonight that infectious enthusiasm was exactly what I needed. I glanced around the room. Malcolm sat in his usual spot on the couch, grading papers even during our party. Our daughter Nora was upstairs, hopefully asleep despite the laughter drifting from below. My mother Vivian was holding court by the kitchen island, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass as she told stories to anyone who'd listen. "I'm in," I said, settling cross-legged on the carpet. The game progressed through our group of friends and family members, with mostly harmless questions and silly dares. Then it was my turn. "Eulalia," Janet said with a mischievous grin. "Truth or dare?" "Dare." The word slipped out before I could think twice. I felt reckless, desperate for something to shake up the monotony of my predictable life. Janet's eyes sparkled as she scanned the room. "I dare you to kiss the most attractive man here who isn't your husband." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of Malcolm's pen scratching against paper. He hadn't even looked up. My heart pounded as I realized this was my chance. A perfect opportunity to see if Malcolm would finally show some emotion, some sign that he still cared enough to be jealous. My eyes landed on Cal Finch, our friend from the gym. At 31, he was all lean muscle and easy confidence, the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room when he talked to you. He'd been flirting with me subtly all evening, complimenting my dress and laughing a little too hard at my jokes. "Well," I said, standing up slowly, "I guess that would be Cal." Cal's face lit up with surprise and delight. "I'm honored," he said, rising to meet me in the center of the circle. I could feel everyone watching as I approached him. This was it. The moment Malcolm would finally react, would show some passion, would fight for me. I placed my hands on Cal's shoulders and leaned in, pressing my lips to his. What was supposed to be a quick peck lingered longer than it should have. Cal's hands found my waist, and for a moment I forgot we had an audience. When we broke apart, the room erupted in whoops and laughter. My mother Vivian was cackling, "Oh, honey, you still got it." But my eyes immediately went to Malcolm. He was still grading papers. "Malcolm," I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. "Did you see that?" He finally looked up, his expression neutral. "See what?" "Your wife just kissed another man," Cal said with a cocky grin, his arm still around my waist. Malcolm's mother Gina, who'd been quietly observing from her chair by the window, cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Maybe we should move on to something else," she suggested. "Oh, come on, Gina," my mother interjected. "It was just a game. Don't be such a prude." Malcolm set down his pen and looked directly at me for the first time all evening. "It's fine," he said simply. "It was just a dare." Just a dare. That's all our marriage meant to him. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from anger. Here I was, trying to provoke some kind of reaction, and he couldn't even be bothered to care. "Exactly," I said, my voice tight. "Just a harmless game between adults. Some people understand that." Malcolm's younger brother Tristan shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Maybe we should call it a night," he suggested. "It's getting pretty late." But I wasn't ready to let this go. "No, I think it's interesting how some people can just shut off their emotions like that. Must be nice to never feel anything strongly enough to react." "Eulalia," Gina said quietly, "Malcolm isn't the type to make a scene." "No, he certainly isn't," I replied, the wine making me bolder than usual. He's not the type to do anything that might require actual effort or emotion. The room had gone uncomfortably quiet. Our friends were looking anywhere but at us, and I could see 9-year-old Nora peeking around the corner from the staircase, her eyes wide with confusion. Malcolm stood up slowly, gathering his papers. "I think our guests are ready to head home," he said calmly. "It's been a long day." As people began to leave, making awkward excuses and quick goodbyes, Cal lingered by my side. "Hey," he said quietly, "if you ever want to talk about anything, you know where to find me." I nodded, hyper-aware of his hand brushing against mine as he handed me his empty beer bottle. "Thanks, Cal. I might take you up on that." After everyone left, I found Malcolm in the kitchen, methodically washing the party dishes. The silence between us was deafening. "So that's it," I finally said. "You're just going to pretend nothing happened?" He didn't look up from the sink. "What do you want me to say, Ilyra?" "I want you to care. I want you to show some emotion, some sign that you still see me as your wife and not just some roommate who happens to share your bed." Malcolm dried his hands on the dish towel and turned to face me. His expression was unreadable, which only frustrated me more. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "I saw my wife kiss another man in front of our friends and family. I saw our daughter watching from the stairs. I saw you trying to humiliate me." "I wasn't trying to humiliate you," I protested, though even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure it was true. "I was trying to get a reaction from you, any reaction." "Well, you got one," he said, hanging up the towel. "I'm going to bed." As he walked past me toward the stairs, I grabbed his arm. "That's it? That's your big reaction?" He paused, and for a moment I thought he might finally explode, might show me the passion I'd been craving. Instead, he gently removed my hand from his arm. "What did you expect, Ilyra? Did you want me to punch Cal, make a scene in front of our daughter, give everyone something to really talk about?" "I wanted you to fight for me," I whispered. Malcolm looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "I didn't know I had to," he said finally, then continued up the stairs. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our party, feeling more invisible than ever. But as I replayed the evening in my mind, one moment stood out: the feel of Cal's lips on mine, the way he'd looked at me like I was worth fighting for. Maybe Malcolm didn't care enough to fight for our marriage, but at least someone still saw me as desirable. At least someone still made me feel alive. I pulled out my phone and found Cal's number. Before I could second-guess myself, I typed out a message. "Thanks for being such a good sport tonight. Want to grab coffee sometime this week?" His response came almost immediately. "I'd love to. How about Tuesday after your workout?" I smiled for the first time all evening. "Perfect. See you then." As I headed upstairs, I felt a thrill of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe this was exactly what I needed, a reminder of what it felt like to be wanted, to be pursued, to matter to someone. I found Malcolm already in bed, his back turned to me, apparently asleep. Or pretending to be. Either way, he clearly had nothing more to say about what had happened downstairs. Fine. If he wanted to ignore me, I'd give him something real to ignore. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. I found myself checking the clock every few minutes at work, my mind wandering from insurance claims to thoughts of Cal's easy smile and confident demeanor. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, I practically ran to my car. At the gym, I'd put extra effort into my appearance. New workout clothes that hugged my curves, fresh makeup that looked natural but took 20 minutes to perfect. Cal noticed immediately. "Wow," he said as I approached the free weights section. "You look amazing today." The compliment sent a warm flutter through my chest. When was the last time Malcolm had noticed what I was wearing, let alone complimented me on it? "Thanks," I said, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. "Ready for that coffee?" The bistro was busy with the after-work crowd, but we managed to snag a corner table that felt intimate despite the surrounding chatter. Cal leaned forward as we talked, his attention completely focused on me, in a way that made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. "I have to ask," he said, stirring his coffee, "are you happy at home?" The question caught me off guard, though I suppose I should have expected it after Saturday night's display. "That's complicated," I said carefully. "It doesn't seem complicated from where I'm sitting. You're this vibrant, intelligent, beautiful woman, and your husband barely looked up from his paperwork while you were right there in front of him." I felt tears prick at my eyes. It wasn't always like this. When we first got married, Malcolm was different, more attentive, more present. But somewhere along the way, he just checked out. Now I feel like I'm married to a stranger who happens to share my last name. Cal reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "You deserve better than that, Ilyra. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are." The warmth of his touch sent electricity up my arm. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd made different choices. "It's not too late to make different choices now," he said softly. We talked for 2 hours, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone: my loneliness, my frustration, my growing resentment toward Malcolm's emotional distance. Cal listened without judgment, offering understanding and validation I'd been starving for. "We should do this again," he said as we walked to our cars. "Definitely," I agreed, then impulsively added, "maybe dinner next time." His smile was answer enough. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months, but that feeling evaporated the moment I walked through the front door. Malcolm was helping Nora with her homework at the kitchen table, the picture of domestic responsibility. "How was the gym?" he asked without looking up from Nora's math worksheet. "Fine," I said, guilt making my voice sharper than necessary. "The usual." "Mom, look." Nora held up her paper proudly. "I got all the multiplication problems right." I forced a smile and ruffled her hair. "That's great, sweetheart. You're getting so smart." As I headed upstairs to shower, I heard Malcolm telling Nora how proud he was of her hard work. His voice was warm and engaged in a way it never was when he talked to me anymore. When had I become less important to him than a fourth-grade math assignment? Over the next few weeks, coffee dates with Cal became a regular occurrence. We met twice a week, always after my gym sessions, and our conversations grew increasingly intimate. He told me about his failed engagement, his dreams of opening his own fitness studio, his belief that life was too short to settle for mediocrity. "You light up when you talk about your work," he said during one of our meetings. "I bet you're amazing at what you do." "Malcolm thinks my job is boring," I found myself saying. "He's never even asked about my cases or shown any interest in what I accomplish." "Then Malcolm's an idiot," Cal said bluntly. "Any man who doesn't appreciate you doesn't deserve you." I started looking forward to our meetings more than anything else in my week. Cal made me feel seen, valued, desired, everything I wasn't getting at home. When he texted me throughout the day with encouraging messages or funny observations, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced since I was a teenager. Meanwhile, things with Malcolm grew increasingly tense. He'd started asking more questions about my schedule, noting when I came home later than usual or seemed distracted during dinner. "You've been spending a lot of time at the gym lately," he observed one evening as I checked my phone for the third time during Nora's bedtime story. "I'm trying to get in shape," I said defensively. "I thought you'd be supportive of that." "I am supportive. I just noticed you seem different lately." "Different how?" He studied my face for a moment. "Distant, like your mind is somewhere else." I felt a flash of anger. "Maybe if you paid attention to me when my mind was here, I wouldn't need to think about other things." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He never responded anymore, which only fueled my frustration. How could he just sit there while our marriage crumbled around us? That night, I lay in bed next to my silent husband, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Cal's laugh, the way he looked at me like I hung the moon. When my phone buzzed with a late-night text from him, "Hope you're having sweet dreams," I felt my heart race, I glanced at Malcolm, who appeared to be sleeping, then quickly typed back, "Thinking of you too." The response was immediate. "Wish I could be there to kiss you goodnight." My breath caught. We were crossing a line and we both knew it. I should have put the phone away, should have focused on fixing things with my husband. Instead, I found myself typing, "I wish you could too." "Malcolm," I whispered, testing if he was really asleep. No response. Just like always. I turned back to my phone and continued the conversation with Cal until well past midnight, each message pulling me further away from the man lying beside me and deeper into a fantasy that felt more real than my actual life. The next morning, Malcolm's mother Gina called while I was getting ready for work. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice carrying that concerned tone I'd been hearing more often lately. "I was wondering if you and Malcolm would like to bring Nora over for dinner this Sunday. It's been too long since we've all been together." "That sounds nice," I said, though I was already thinking about whether I'd have to cancel plans with Cal. "Is everything okay with you too?" Gina asked gently. Malcolm seemed a little subdued when I talked to him yesterday. "We're fine," I lied, "just busy with work and Nora's school activities. You know how it is." But Gina had known Malcolm for 36 years, and she had a mother's intuition about when something was wrong. "Well, if you ever need to talk, you know I'm here. You're like a daughter to me, Eulalia." The kindness in her voice made me feel worse about the secrets I was keeping. Gina had always been good to me, welcoming me into the family without reservation. She deserved better than a daughter-in-law who was emotionally cheating on her son. But as I drove to work, my phone buzzed with another message from Cal. "Can't wait to see you tonight. You're all I think about." And just like that, the guilt faded, replaced by anticipation and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted. I was playing with fire, and I knew it. But after years of feeling invisible in my own marriage, the flames felt like coming back to life. 3 months into my emotional affair with Cal, I was living a double life that both thrilled and exhausted me. At home, I went through the motions of being a wife and mother, but my real life happened in stolen moments. Text messages during meetings, lingering looks at the gym, coffee dates that stretched longer each week. Malcolm had grown more suspicious, asking pointed questions about my whereabouts and studying my face when I explained my frequent absences, but he still hadn't confronted me directly, which I took as proof that he didn't care enough to fight for our marriage. "I'm working late tonight," I told him on a Thursday evening in October, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Big case I need to finish up." Malcolm looked up from helping Nora with her science project. "On a Thursday night? That's unusual." "Insurance fraud doesn't keep regular business hours," I said, the lie rolling off my tongue easily. I'd gotten good at this. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Probably not. Don't wait up." I kissed Nora's forehead and headed for the door, ignoring the weight of Malcolm's stare on my back. Cal was waiting for me at the bistro, looking handsome in a way that made my pulse quicken. We'd graduated from coffee to dinner dates, and tonight felt different, charged with an electricity that had been building for weeks. "You look incredible," he said, standing to pull out my chair. "Thank you," I said, settling into the intimate booth he'd chosen in the back corner of the restaurant. "I needed this tonight." "Rough day?" "Rough marriage," I said without thinking, then immediately felt guilty for being so blunt. Cal reached across the table and took my hand. "You know you don't have to stay in a situation that makes you unhappy. It's not that simple. There's Nora to think about, and our families, and your life," he interrupted gently. "What about what you want, Eulalia?" Before I could answer, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eulalia?" My blood turned to ice. I spun around to find Malcolm standing next to our table, his face a mask of controlled shock. He was still wearing his teaching clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt that suddenly made him look young and vulnerable. "Malcolm," I stammered, my hand flying away from Cal's like I'd been burned. "What are you doing here?" "Tristan wanted to grab dinner after his evening class," Malcolm said quietly, gesturing toward his younger brother, who was hovering awkwardly near the hostess stand. I could ask you the same question. Cal stood up, extending his hand with infuriating confidence. Hey man, I'm Cal. We met at your party a few months back. Malcolm stared at Cal's outstretched hand for a long moment before reluctantly shaking it. I remember. The tension was suffocating. Other diners were starting to notice the drama unfolding in the corner booth, and I felt heat creeping up my neck. This isn't what it looks like, I said, though even I knew how ridiculous that sounded. What does it look like? Malcolm asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Like your wife is having dinner with a friend, Cal interjected smoothly. Nothing wrong with that, right? Malcolm's eyes never left my face. Is that what this is, Eulalia? Dinner with a friend? I opened my mouth to lie again, to maintain the charade that had been eating away at me for months. But something in Malcolm's expression, the hurt, the resignation, the way he was looking at me like he was seeing a stranger, made the words stick in my throat. Malcolm, can we talk about this at home? I said instead. I think we're talking about it now, he replied. Tristan approached our table cautiously. Maybe we should all just... No, Cal interrupted, his arm sliding possessively around my shoulders. I think it's time everything was out in the open. Eulalia deserves to be with someone who appreciates her. The restaurant had gone noticeably quieter, with nearby tables openly watching our confrontation. I wanted to disappear into the floor. And you think that's you? Malcolm asked Cal, his voice still eerily calm. I know it is, Cal replied with cocky certainty. When's the last time you made her feel special? When's the last time you told her she was beautiful, or took her somewhere nice, or even looked up from your damn paperwork when she walked in the room? Each word hit like a physical blow, and I could see Malcolm flinch. But instead of anger, I saw something worse in his eyes. Acknowledgement, like he knew Cal was right. Malcolm, I whispered, reaching toward him. He stepped back. How long? What? How long has this been going on? I glanced around the restaurant, acutely aware of our audience. Can we please not do this here? How long? The steel in his voice made me shiver. This wasn't the passive, disengaged Malcolm I'd grown used to. This was someone I barely recognized. 3 months, I admitted quietly. Malcolm nodded slowly, like he was processing information. 3 months of lies, 3 months of working late and gym sessions and looking me in the eye while you lied to me. You never cared before, I exploded, my frustration finally boiling over. You never asked where I was or what I was doing or how I felt about anything. You've been checked out of our marriage for years. So this is my fault? Malcolm asked. It's both of your faults, Cal said, standing up straighter. But mostly yours, buddy. You had a beautiful, amazing woman at home and you ignored her. What did you expect would happen? I expected my wife to talk to me if she was unhappy instead of sneaking around behind my back, Malcolm replied, his voice rising slightly for the first time. When? I demanded. When was I supposed to talk to you? When you were grading papers? When you were planning lessons? When you were staring at your phone instead of paying attention to your own family? You never tried. I tried for years, I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I tried to get your attention, to make you see me, to make you care, and you just didn't. The entire restaurant was watching now, some people even holding up phones to record the drama. I should have been mortified, but I was too angry, too hurt, too desperate to make Malcolm understand. I've been invisible in my own marriage, I continued, my voice breaking. Cal makes me feel alive again. He sees me, he values me, He's married to someone else, Malcolm said quietly. The words hit me like a slap. I turned to stare at Cal, who had gone pale. What? Separated, Cal said quickly. We're separated. It's complicated. But still married, Malcolm pressed. The divorce will be final soon, Cal insisted, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Malcolm pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was Cal's Facebook page, featuring a photo from just 2 weeks ago of him and a woman I didn't recognize, both wearing wedding rings, both smiling at what appeared to be a family gathering. Posted 14 days ago, Malcolm said. Doesn't look very separated to me. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Cal? It's not what you think, Cal said desperately. That was just for appearances. My wife and I are working things out legally, but emotionally we've been done for months. You lied to me, I whispered. I didn't lie, You're both liars, Malcolm said, his calm demeanor finally cracking. But at least he's lying to protect his marriage. What's your excuse, Ilyra? Before I could respond, Cal stepped closer to Malcolm, his chest puffed out aggressively. Hey man, back off. You don't get to talk to her like that. She's my wife, Malcolm said simply. Not for much longer if you keep treating her like garbage, Cal shot back. And then, to my horror, Cal shoved Malcolm backward into another table, sending water glasses crashing to the floor. The restaurant erupted in gasps and shouts as Malcolm stumbled, but managed to stay on his feet. Cal, stop, I screamed. But Cal was beyond reason now, apparently feeling like he needed to defend my honor, or prove his masculinity, or something equally stupid. He drew back his fist, clearly intending to punch my husband. Malcolm didn't fight back. Instead, he calmly pulled out his phone and dialed 911. I need to report an assault at the bistro on Main Street, he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Cal's face. The perpetrator is still here and appears to be intoxicated. I'm not drunk, Cal protested, but his aggressive behavior and slurred words suggested otherwise. Sir, I need you to step away from the other customers, the restaurant manager said, appearing at our table with 2 servers as backup. The next 20 minutes were a blur of police officers, witness statements, and humiliation. Cal was arrested for assault and public intoxication, protesting his innocence even as they put him in handcuffs. Several customers had recorded the entire incident on their phones, and I knew it would be all over social media within hours. Malcolm gave his statement with calm precision, sticking to the facts without editorial comment. I found myself admiring his composure, even as I hated him for it. Are you pressing charges? The officer asked Malcolm. Malcolm looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something die in his eyes. Yes, he said finally. I am. As the police car pulled away with Cal in the back seat, I stood on the sidewalk outside the bistro, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The man I'd been having an affair with was married and now under arrest. My husband had just publicly humiliated me in front of half the town. And somewhere in the chaos, I realized I'd lost any moral high ground I might have claimed. Tristan will give you a ride home, Malcolm said, his voice flat and emotionless. I need some time to think. Malcolm, please. 3 months, Ilyra. 3 months of lies. He shook his head. I need to figure out what that means for us. He walked to his car without looking back, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with his brother, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. Come on, Tristan said quietly. Let's get you home. As we drove in uncomfortable silence, I caught him glancing at me in the rearview mirror with something that looked like disappointment. Another relationship I'd probably destroyed tonight. When we pulled into my driveway, I could see the living room light was still on. Nora was probably waiting up, wondering where her parents were and why we hadn't come home together. How was I going to explain this to my 9-year-old daughter? How was I going to explain it to anyone? My phone buzzed with a text notification, and for a moment I hoped it was Malcolm. Instead, it was from my mother. Just saw the video on Facebook. Call me immediately. My heart sank as I realized the full scope of my humiliation was just beginning. By morning, everyone we knew would have seen me caught in my affair, watched my husband get assaulted, witnessed the complete implosion of my marriage in high definition. I walked into my house to face my confused daughter and an uncertain future, finally understanding that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The video went viral overnight. By Friday morning, restaurant drama had been shared across multiple social media platforms, complete with commentary from strangers dissecting my marriage and moral character. The comments were brutal. Cheating wife gets caught red-handed. Feel bad for the husband and kid. That guy Cal is married too. What a mess. I called in sick to work, unable to face my colleagues after my personal life had exploded so publicly. Instead, I spent the morning fielding calls from my mother, who was simultaneously outraged on my behalf and mortified by the spectacle. "How could you be so careless?" Vivian demanded during her third call before noon. "Meeting him in public like that? What were you thinking?" "I wasn't expecting Malcolm to show up," I said, pacing around my empty house. Nora was at school, blissfully unaware that her family's drama was entertainment for thousands of strangers online. "Well, what's done is done. Have you talked to Malcolm? Where is he?" "I don't know. He didn't come home last night." "He's probably at Gina's house, getting her all worked up against you. That woman never liked me, and she's probably thrilled to have ammunition against our family." The thought of Malcolm's mother harboring Nora while poisoning her against me made my stomach churn. "I need to see my daughter." "Maybe give it a day or two for things to cool down," Vivian suggested, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe that would help. After we hung up, I tried calling Malcolm repeatedly, but every call went straight to voicemail. I drove by the school where he worked, but his car wasn't in the parking lot. Finally, I swallowed my pride and called Gina. "Hello, Ilyra," she said, her voice cooler than I'd ever heard it. "Gina, I need to see Nora. Is she with you?" "She's safe." "That's not what I asked. I want to see my daughter." There was a long pause. "I think it's best if you give Malcolm some time to sort through the situation before involving Nora further." "Involving her? She's my child." "She's also a little girl who's very confused about why her father is sleeping on my couch and why her classmates are talking about a video they saw online." My heart broke. "The kids at school saw it." "Ilyra," Gina said gently, and I could hear the disappointment that hurt worse than anger would have. "What did you expect? You had an affair, in public, with cameras rolling. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen? What was the plan here?" I didn't have an answer for that. There had been no plan beyond the intoxicating rush of feeling wanted again. "I want to see Nora," I repeated. "Malcolm is her father too, and right now he's concerned about exposing her to more drama. Give him the weekend. Let him figure out how to explain this to her in an age-appropriate way." "You can't keep me from my own child." "I'm not keeping you from anyone," Gina said firmly. "I'm protecting my granddaughter from further trauma while her parents figure out how to act like adults." The line went dead. I spent the weekend alone, alternating between rage and despair. Cal had been released from jail but wasn't returning my calls. When I finally reached him on Sunday, his voice was strained and distant. "This is a mess, Ilyra," he said. "My wife saw the video. She's threatening to take me for everything in the divorce." "I thought you were already getting divorced." "We were working on reconciliation, actually. But now—" He sighed heavily. "Look, I think we need to cool things off for a while." "Cool things off?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Cal, I destroyed my marriage for you." "You destroyed your marriage because you were unhappy. That's not on me. But you said you cared about me. You said I deserved better." "You do deserve better, but I can't be the guy who gives it to you right now. I've got my own situation to deal with." After he hung up, I sat in my empty house and cried harder than I had since my father's funeral. I'd lost my husband, my lover, access to my daughter, and my dignity all in one spectacular weekend. Monday brought new problems. My boss, Patricia, called me into her office first thing. "Ilyra, we need to discuss your recent overtime claims," she said, spreading out several timesheets on her desk. My stomach dropped. "What about them?" "You've been claiming overtime for evening work on multiple occasions over the past 3 months, but building security shows you leaving at your regular time on those dates." I stared at the evidence in front of me. security logs that contradicted every lie I'd told about working late to cover my meetings with Cal. "There might be some confusion with the dates," I said weakly. "There's also the matter of your expense reports. You've submitted receipts for business dinners that our clients have no record of." Patricia pulled out another folder. "The Hendersons say they never met with you at Giuseppe's on September 15th, despite your claim that you took them to dinner to discuss their claim. In fact, they were out of town that weekend." I felt the walls closing in. In my eagerness to create alibis for my affair, I'd committed what amounted to fraud against my own company. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first, I need you to gather your personal items. We're conducting a full audit of your recent work, and until that's complete, you're suspended without pay." The walk to my car felt like a perp walk. Colleagues I'd worked with for 6 years avoided eye contact as I carried my box of personal items through the office. By the time I reached the parking lot, I was fighting back tears again. My phone rang as I sat in my car, trying to process how completely my life had imploded. It was Tristan. "Eulalia, we need to talk." "If this is about Malcolm..." "It's about Nora. She's asking questions, and Malcolm doesn't know what to tell her." "Where is he? He won't take my calls." "He's hurt, Eulalia. Really hurt. But he's also worried about you." That surprised me. "Worried about me?" "You're still Nora's mother. He doesn't want to destroy that relationship, even if yours is over." "Is it over?" I asked quietly. Tristan was quiet for a long moment. "I think that's up to you two to figure out. But right now, he needs space, and Nora needs stability. I just want to see my daughter. Then prove you're thinking about what's best for her instead of what's best for you." After he hung up, I sat in my car outside my former workplace and took stock of my situation. I was suspended from my job, possibly facing fraud charges. My husband wasn't speaking to me. My lover had abandoned me. My daughter was being kept from me by well-meaning in-laws. And somewhere online, thousands of strangers were still commenting on the video that captured the moment my life fell apart. I drove home to my empty house and found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside were divorce papers and a thick stack of documents that made my blood run cold. Malcolm hadn't just been quietly suffering while I carried on my affair. He'd been documenting everything. Phone records showing my calls and texts to Cal, credit card statements highlighting charges at restaurants and hotels during times I'd claimed to be working, screenshots of social media posts that contradicted my alibis, even testimony from Nora's teacher about her recent behavioral changes and questions about her parents' relationship. At the bottom of the stack was a note in Malcolm's careful handwriting. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. I know about the hotel room on October 3rd. I know about the weekend trip you told me was a work conference. I know about all of it. I tried to save our marriage, but I won't let you destroy our daughter's life too. My lawyer will be in touch." I sank onto my couch, overwhelmed by the thoroughness of his documentation and the realization that while I'd been playing games, he'd been building a case. The Malcolm I'd dismissed as passive and disengaged had been quietly, methodically protecting himself and our daughter from the fallout of my choices. And now I was about to find out just how high the cost of those choices would be. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat next to my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, watching Malcolm across the aisle with his attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chen, who had a reputation for being ruthless in custody cases. 3 months had passed since that horrible night at the bistro, and they'd been the worst months of my life. The investigation at work had concluded with my termination, and a referral to the district attorney's office for fraud charges. I'd been forced to move in with my mother after Malcolm changed the locks on our house, and I'd seen Nora exactly 4 times, always supervised visits that left us both in tears. "Remember," Jennifer whispered as we waited for the judge, "stick to the emotional neglect angle. Don't get defensive about the affair." I nodded, though my stomach was churning. Malcolm looked calm and composed, wearing a navy suit that made him appear mature and responsible. He'd lost weight over the past few months, and the stress had added lines around his eyes, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that I envied. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martinez," the bailiff announced. Judge Martinez was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who wasted no time getting to business. "This is a dissolution of marriage hearing for Harker versus Harker, with primary focus on child custody arrangements. I've reviewed both parties' filings. Mrs. Harker, your attorney may present your case." Jennifer stood, launching into her prepared argument about my rights as a mother and Malcolm's alleged emotional neglect. She painted me as a lonely wife who'd made mistakes but deserved equal custody of my daughter. "My client acknowledges that she made poor choices," Jennifer said, "but those choices were the result of years of emotional abandonment by her husband. Mrs. Harker felt invisible in her own marriage and sought validation elsewhere. While this was wrong, it doesn't make her an unfit mother." When it was Sarah Chen's turn, she approached the podium with a thick folder that made my palms sweat. "Your Honor, this case is not about a marriage that grew cold. It's about a pattern of deception, financial fraud, and reckless behavior that directly impacted the minor child involved." She opened her folder and began presenting evidence I'd hoped would never see the light of day. Bank statements showing charges at hotels during my supposed work trips, screenshots of text messages between Cal and me that were far more explicit than I'd remembered, photos from Cal's social media showing us together at restaurants while I'd told Malcolm I was working late. "Mrs. Harker didn't just have an affair," Sarah continued. "She systematically lied to her husband, her employer, and her daughter for months. She committed fraud against her company to cover her tracks. She exposed her child to inappropriate situations, including bringing her paramour to family gatherings and allowing him to stay overnight in the family home." "That's not true," I whispered to Jennifer, but even as I said it, I remembered the morning Cal had been in our kitchen making coffee when Nora came downstairs for breakfast. I'd told her he'd stopped by early to discuss workout plans. Sarah wasn't finished. Furthermore, Mrs. Harker has shown no remorse for her actions and continues to blame others for her choices. She's currently unemployed due to fraud charges and has no stable housing arrangement. She called Malcolm to the stand, and I watched my soon-to-be ex-husband swear to tell the truth with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout this entire nightmare. "Mr. Harker, can you describe your daughter's emotional state during the period of your wife's affair?" Malcolm's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. Nora became withdrawn and anxious. Her grades dropped. She started having nightmares and asking questions about why Mommy was always angry and why we didn't eat dinner together anymore. "Did you attempt to address these issues with your wife?" "Multiple times. I suggested marriage counseling, asked if she wanted to talk about what was bothering her, tried to plan family activities to reconnect. She either dismissed my concerns or blamed me for not being exciting enough." "What was your reaction when you discovered the affair?" Malcolm looked directly at me for the first time since we'd entered the courtroom. "I was devastated, but I was more concerned about protecting Nora from further trauma. That's why I gathered evidence quietly instead of confronting Eulalia immediately." Sarah presented more evidence, recordings of my phone calls with Cal that Malcolm's private investigator had legally obtained through phone records, testimony from Nora's teacher about her declining performance and emotional distress, even a statement from my former boss about the fraud investigation. When it was my turn to testify, Jennifer tried to rehabilitate my image by focusing on my years as a devoted mother before the affair. "Mrs. Harker, can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter?" "I love Nora more than anything," I said, fighting back tears. "She's the most important thing in my life. I made mistakes, but I never stopped being a good mother to her." "Can you explain the circumstances that led to your affair?" This was my chance to make them understand. "I felt invisible in my marriage. Malcolm was always working or grading papers or planning lessons. We never talked anymore, never went out together, never connected as a couple. I felt like I was dying inside, and Cal made me feel alive again. Do you regret your actions? I regret hurting Nora, I said carefully. I regret the way everything came out. But I don't regret trying to find happiness. I saw Judge Martinez raise an eyebrow at that response, and I realized I'd made a mistake. Sarah's cross-examination was brutal. She walked me through every lie I'd told, every fraudulent expense report I'd filed, every time I'd put my affair ahead of my daughter's needs. Mrs. Harker, you testified that you were seeking happiness. Was your daughter's happiness part of that consideration? Of course it was. Then why did you bring Mr. Finch to your home when your daughter was present? We were just friends then. Sarah pulled out a text message and read it aloud. Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Last night was incredible. She looked up at me. This message was sent the morning after Mr. Finch stayed overnight in your home, with your 9-year-old daughter present. Still just friends? I felt my face burn with shame. That was taken out of context. Mrs. Harker, you committed fraud against your employer to create alibis for your affair. You lied to your husband daily for months. You exposed your daughter to inappropriate adult situations. Can you understand why the court might question your judgment as a parent? I wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't that simple, that Malcolm shared blame for our marriage falling apart. But sitting in that courtroom, surrounded by evidence of my deception and poor choices, I finally saw myself as others saw me. I wasn't a neglected wife seeking happiness. I was a woman who'd blown up her family's life for a man who'd abandoned me the moment things got complicated. The judge called a brief recess, and I watched Malcolm talking quietly with his mother and brother in the hallway. They formed a united front, a family protecting one of their own. Meanwhile, I sat with my mother, who was still insisting this was all Malcolm's fault somehow. When court reconvened, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling with crisp efficiency. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mrs. Harker's actions over the past year demonstrate poor judgment and a pattern of deception that directly impacted the minor child's well-being. Mr. Harker will be granted primary physical custody, with Mrs. Harker receiving supervised visitation rights pending completion of counseling and demonstration of stable housing and employment. The gavel came down like a gunshot, and I felt my world collapse completely. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mrs. Harker is ordered to pay child support based on imputed income, as her current unemployment is the result of her own misconduct. As people filed out of the courtroom, Malcolm approached me hesitantly. For a moment, I thought he might offer some comfort, some acknowledgement of what we'd once meant to each other. Instead, he said quietly, I hope you get the help you need, Eulalia, for Nora's sake. Then he walked away with our daughter's future in his hands, leaving me to face the consequences of choices I was finally beginning to understand had been selfish from the very beginning. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat in my studio apartment, staring at the court-ordered visitation schedule taped to my refrigerator. 2 hours every other Saturday, supervised by a court-appointed social worker. That's what remained of my relationship with my daughter. The apartment was a far cry from the suburban home I'd shared with Malcolm and Nora. Located above a dry cleaner, in the less desirable part of town, it smelled perpetually of chemical solvents and broken dreams. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through the night, and the single window looked out onto a parking lot where teenagers gathered to smoke and cause trouble. My mother had finally grown tired of my self-pity and asked me to find my own place after I'd spent 3 months sleeping on her couch, crying and blaming everyone but myself for my situation. You need to take responsibility and rebuild your life, she'd said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Even Vivian, who'd always taken my side in everything, seemed worn down by the constant drama. Finding work had been nearly impossible. The fraud charges had been reduced to a misdemeanor with community service, but the conviction showed up on every background check. I'd applied for dozens of positions, from retail clerk to restaurant server, but most employers weren't interested in hiring someone whose last job had ended with criminal charges. I finally found part-time work at a call center, making cold calls to sell extended car warranties. The pay was terrible, the hours were irregular, and my supervisor was a 25-year-old who treated me like I was lucky to have any job at all. But it was enough to cover rent and basic expenses, with a little left over for the child support payments that felt like salt in an open wound. My phone buzzed with a text from the court-appointed supervisor. Running 15 minutes late for today's visit. Please wait in the lobby. I gathered my purse and the small gift I'd bought for Nora, a book about horses that I hoped she'd like. These supervised visits were awkward and painful, conducted in a sterile office building with a social worker taking notes on every interaction. Nora was polite but distant, answering my questions with single words and avoiding eye contact. The worst part was seeing how much she'd grown and changed in the months since I'd been a real part of her life. She was taller, more mature, more confident. Malcolm had enrolled her in piano lessons, and she'd made new friends at school. She was thriving without me, which should have made me happy but instead filled me with a grief so profound it sometimes took my breath away. "How's school going, sweetheart?" I asked during our latest visit, trying to fill the silence that seemed to grow heavier each time we met. "Good," Nora said, coloring in the activity book the supervisor had provided. She didn't look up. "Are you still enjoying piano?" "Yeah." "Maybe you could play something for me sometime." Nora finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that cut me to the core. Pity. My 9-year-old daughter felt sorry for me. "Dad says maybe when you get better," she said quietly. "When you get better." As if I was sick instead of someone who'd made catastrophic choices. Though maybe there wasn't much difference. "I am getting better," I said, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. I was seeing a court-ordered therapist, Dr. Rebecca Stone, who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after major failures. Our sessions were painful excavations of my choices and motivations, forcing me to confront truths I'd spent years avoiding. "You've been living in a fantasy," Dr. Stone had said during our last session. "A fantasy where you were the victim of your circumstances instead of the author of your choices. Recovery starts with accepting responsibility." "I know Malcolm wasn't entirely to blame," I'd protested, "but he did check out of our marriage emotionally." "And what did you do to address that before seeking validation elsewhere?" The question had haunted me for days because the honest answer was nothing substantial. I'd complained, I'd grown resentful, I'd felt sorry for myself, but I'd never insisted on marriage counseling, never had a serious conversation about my needs, never given Malcolm a real chance to fix what was broken between us. Instead, I'd chosen the path that felt good in the moment, consequences be damned. After the visit with Nora ended, I drove aimlessly through town, passing landmarks of my former life. The gym where I'd met Cal was still there, though I'd cancelled my membership months ago. The bistro had closed down, unable to recover from the negative publicity generated by viral videos of customer altercations. Even the restaurant that had been the scene of my downfall had become a casualty of my choices. I found myself parked outside my old house, Malcolm and Nora's house now. It was early evening, and I could see warm light glowing from the kitchen window. Through the sheer curtains, I caught glimpses of my former life. Malcolm helping Nora with homework at the kitchen table, the same scene I'd found so boring when I was part of it. Now it looked like everything I'd lost. A car pulled into the driveway, and I recognized Gina getting out with grocery bags. She'd moved in temporarily to help with Nora while Malcolm adjusted to single parenthood, another reminder of the support system I'd forfeited with my choices. As I watched my former mother-in-law help my daughter carry groceries into the house I'd once called home, my phone rang. For a moment, I hoped it might be Malcolm, though we hadn't spoken directly since the divorce proceedings ended. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Ilyra Verdane?" "Yes." This is Detective Ryan Murphy with the County Sheriff's Office. I need to ask you some questions about Calvin Finch. My blood ran cold. What about him? Mr. Finch was arrested yesterday on charges of embezzlement from his employer. During the investigation, your name came up in connection with some fraudulent activities. We'd like you to come in for questioning. I closed my eyes, feeling the last vestiges of my old life crumbling away. Even Cal, the man I'd destroyed my marriage for, was dragging me deeper into legal trouble. Do I need a lawyer? That's your choice, ma'am, but we'd appreciate your cooperation in clearing up some discrepancies in Mr. Finch's financial records. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the house that used to be mine, watching my daughter live a life that no longer included me in any meaningful way. The supervised visits, the court orders, the careful distance Malcolm maintained, it was all designed to protect Nora from further damage I might cause. And maybe they were right to protect her from me. I thought about Cal, probably sitting in a jail cell right now, facing the consequences of choices that had seemed so justified when we were making them together. I wondered if he thought about me, if he regretted the path that had led us both to destruction, or if he was too focused on his own survival to spare a thought for the woman who'd been collateral damage in his schemes. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw the news about Cal's arrest. Are you involved? The news. Of course it had made the news. My humiliation was destined to be public, apparently. A cautionary tale played out for everyone's entertainment and judgment. I started my car and drove back to my studio apartment, past the dry cleaner and up the narrow stairs that creaked under my weight. Inside, I poured a glass of the cheap wine that had become my evening companion and sat at my tiny kitchen table to contemplate what was left of my life. 32 years old, divorced, unemployed, except for part-time telemarketing work, facing possible criminal charges, estranged from my daughter, living alone in a studio apartment that smelled like industrial chemicals. This was the life I'd chosen when I decided Malcolm's quiet stability wasn't exciting enough for me. I pulled out my laptop and Googled Cal's arrest, finding articles that mentioned me as a co-conspirator in his schemes. Apparently, the hotel rooms and expensive dinners I'd thought were romantic gestures had been funded through embezzled money from his employer. Even my affair had been built on lies and theft. The comments on the articles were predictably harsh. Wasn't this the woman from that restaurant video? She sure knows how to pick them. Feel bad for her kid having a mother like this. Play with fire, get burned. I closed the laptop and walked to my single window, looking out at the parking lot where a group of teenagers was gathered around someone's car, music thumping from their speakers. They looked young and carefree, their whole lives ahead of them, all their mistakes still unmade. Tomorrow I'd have to find a lawyer I couldn't afford to help me navigate whatever legal trouble Cal had dragged me into. I'd have to face more questions, more judgment, more consequences for choices I was finally beginning to understand had been selfish and destructive from the beginning. But tonight, I stood at my window and mourned the life I'd thrown away in pursuit of validation from a married man who'd turned out to be a criminal. I mourned the trust I'd broken, the family I'd destroyed, the future I'd forfeited for a fantasy that had never been real. Somewhere across town, Malcolm was probably reading Nora a bedtime story in the house we'd bought together when we still believed in forever. They were building a new life without me, one where Nora could feel safe and secure, where she didn't have to worry about her mother's poor choices disrupting her world. Maybe that was the most loving thing I could do now. Stay away, get my life together, and hope that someday I might earn the right to be part of their story again. But as I stood in my studio apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of choices I couldn't undo, I knew that door might be locked forever. And unlike the party game that had started this whole nightmare, there was no going back, no second chance, no way to undo the kiss that had cost me everything. I'd tested my husband's love and found it wanting, so I'd sought validation elsewhere. Now I was kissing a locked door, begging for entry to a life I'd voluntarily abandoned. The teenagers in the parking lot drove away, their music fading into the distance, leaving me alone with the silence and the consequences of believing I deserved more than the quiet love of a good man who'd never stopped trying to build a stable life for our family. Some tests, I realized too late, destroy the very thing they're meant to measure.